I think about did I cause this? Did I make her feel like she needs to leave?
What drives a man to murder his entire family, including a pregnant wife and 2 daughters?
Don't eat turtle! Don't eat turtle!
This is a story of Chris Watts, a dark and haunting tale unlike anything you've ever heard.
I just felt such anger that nothing, I didn't feel anything.
In this video, we will take you through every aspect of this case, from how the attack was carried out, to the unknown details and hidden footage of the event, even to the realities of life behind bars for the Denver Monster. Get ready for an in-depth revelation as we explore the disturbing story of Chris Watts. In the beginning, Chris and his wife, Shanan, first met on Facebook back in 2010 after Chris sent her a friend request, marking the beginning of a beautiful relationship that no one believed was going to end in tragedy. Coincidentally, both Chris and Shanan were from North Carolina, although Shanan's hometown is listed as Passaic, New Jersey in her Facebook profile. According to those who knew the couple personally, both Chris and his wife appeared to be deeply in love with each other, and their relationship appeared perfect on the outside. They would eventually seal their eternal love on November 3, 2012, when the two tied the knot in Charlotte, North Carolina. Looking at the wedding pictures in retrospect, no one could have imagined that such a happy couple would become the subject of one of America's most gruesome homicide cases. The following year, after the couple got married, Shanan became pregnant with their first child, a joyful news that was celebrated by both friends and families, and on December 17, 2013, the couple welcomed their beautiful daughter, whom they named Bella Marie. Going by the accounts of people close to the wife, Shanan was pretty excited about having her first baby girl, and she and her husband spent every waking moment doting on the young child and taking care of the precious gift they've been blessed with. Fast forward to 2015, and Shanan was pregnant again with their second child. The lovely little girl named Celeste Catherine would eventually arrive on July 17, 2015, and no doubt she was their bundle of joy. But just shortly before the arrival of their bundle of joy, the Watts family were hit with huge financial troubles, and so they had to file for bankruptcy. With a total combined income of $90,000 in 2014, in addition to credit card debt, student loans, and medical bills, the couple declared their bankruptcy in June 2015, and it became obvious that they were going through some tough times. But in spite of the troubles, the couple remained loved up, presenting the appearance of a dream marriage to the public. The 2 little girls grew up so fast, so much so that by 2018, Shanan was pregnant again with their 3rd child, surprising her husband with the announcement in a video that went viral after the incident. In the video, Shanan can be seen wearing a shirt that read, "Oops, we did it again," while Chris didn't exactly look too excited about the news he had just been given. Although the couple appeared to be happy on social media, it turned out that trouble was brewing behind the scenes and no one took notice until Chris made the decision to do the unthinkable. The day Shanan and the kids vanished. August 13, 2018. Around 1:48 a.m., a friend and colleague named Nicole Atkinson dropped Shanan off at the family home located on the 2800 block of Saratoga Trail, Colorado, after returning from a business trip. A CCTV camera captured the moment Shanan entered the home that midnight, but unfortunately, that was the last time she would be seen alive. Later that day, Nicole became worried about the 15 weeks pregnant Shanan after she missed her obstetrics and gynecology appointment and a business meeting, while also ignoring all text messages. Prior to this, she was a notable socially active person who maintained an active profile on social media, which meant she used her phone a lot. So when Nicole realized her calls and texts were not getting any response, she decided to go over to the house to make sure everything was fine. Nicole got to the apartment around 12:10 p.m., but after the doorbells and knocks also went unanswered, She notified Chris and contacted the Frederick Police Department. About an hour 30 minutes later, an officer arrived at the home for a welfare check, and this was when the situation started to unfold. At first, Chris kept both Nicole and the officer waiting for some minutes before eventually arriving on the scene and opening the garage door to grant them access. But instead of sprinting upstairs to check if his wife and kids were okay, Chris goes straight for Shanan's car, inspecting it well before going inside the home for some minutes, and then opening the door from the inside. After receiving the permission to enter the house, the officer, along with Shanan's friend, Nicole, searched the whole premises for signs of the pregnant woman and the kids, but they seemed to have mysteriously vanished. Adding to the whole intrigue was the fact that no signs of struggle were observed in the home. The family dog was unharmed. Shanan's purse was discovered with her keys and her medicine still intact. Her phone was also later discovered between the couch cushions while her car was still sitting in the garage. So this eliminates the possibility of a forced abduction or any theory about a planned disappearance. It was also during this initial search that Chris started attracting suspicion, as he began acting nervous and rattled, contrary to his usual calm demeanor. He also started to make it seem like Shanan had taken the kids and left by pointing out the fact that the kids' blanket was missing and that his wife had dropped the ring on the bedside table before vanishing. However, it was hard for anyone to believe that Shanan would just wake up one morning, take none of her belongings, leave her car and her phone behind, and just take the kids to God knows where. The storyline became even more implausible after officers checked the footage captured by the neighbors' CCTV. What they found out was very disturbing. The secret footage that solved everything. Thanks to the CCTV recording from a neighbor who lived right beside Chris, we can catch a glimpse of some of the events that took place on that fateful day. As the officers conducted the welfare check on August 13, they decided to check the cameras so they could see if and when Shanan left the house. But after poring over the recorded footage, there were still no signs of the wife or the two daughters ever leaving the house. Instead, the camera captured Chris as he pulled his truck into the driveway and loaded some things up before driving off. According to the man, he claimed he was just packing some gas cylinders and tools he needed for work, and then simply drove off to work. But considering the fact that no one else ever came outside the house except for him, Chris's story seemed quite improbable from the start. Upon seeing the footage, Chris also got quite fidgety, and his body language indicated that he was uncomfortable with what was going on. For example, about a minute into the video, Chris puts his hands on his head and looks away from the screen. Luckily, all these signs didn't go unnoticed by those present. As soon as he was out the door after watching the footage, the neighbor in question, identified as Nathaniel Trenastic, told Officer Scott Coonrod he believed Chris was acting suspicious. He claimed that Chris was a naturally quiet guy who didn't talk much, so seeing him explain himself over and over felt like he was trying to convince everyone of his innocence, even though no one had accused him yet set off some signals. Trenastic also revealed to the officers that he and his wife had heard the couple arguing, and they were concerned something happened to Shanan when she left to spend the most of the summer with her daughters in North Carolina. But that's not where it ends. Police got even more suspicious the next day after the naturally introverted Chris decided to grant interviews with not one, but two different Denver TV stations. In the interviews, Chris appeared undisturbed by his family's disappearance, maintaining quite the calm composure for someone facing such a difficult situation. He also started talking about the children in the past tense, while mentioning he just wanted to get them back like they'd been kidnapped. To understand why this tiny little detail is incriminating, you must understand that there was no indication at this point that Shanan and the kids were abducted. So by granting the interviews, Chris took his own name to the top of the suspect list. It didn't take long for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to get involved in the case, and some officers were right there on the property with search dogs as Chris gave the interviews. The following day, on August 15, 2018, Chris was summoned for a polygraph test, and that was when the horrific details of this case started to come out. The truth emerges. In a normal polygraph test, getting a score of -4 is the usual indication that you're lying. But when Chris Watts was put through a polygraph test by Officer Tammy Lee, he scored -18, indicating his undeniable guilt. Lee began the interview by saying that at that moment, only one person in that room knew the truth. But the cool thing was that by the end of the test, 2 of them would. While the polygraph test cannot be used as a legal backup to convict a suspect of a crime, it can sometimes be helpful in breaking down the criminal, so they confess effortlessly. And as much as Chris was a terrible father and husband, he was an even more terrible liar, and his deception was soon exposed. After failing the polygraph test woefully, Chris was confronted by the investigators, who made him understand the extent and implications of his failures. During the polygraph and in the interrogations that followed, Chris then began revealing the state of their marriage prior to the mysterious disappearance. A broken home. On the outside, Chris and Shanan looked like a perfect couple, with their social media posts and romantic videos, but only those close to them knew that their marriage was in shambles. Thanks to a lengthy document unveiled during the trial and the many open secrets that became unveiled, it turns out Chris was actually cheating on his wife with a woman he worked with. The troubles that rocked. The marriage became clearer after officers discovered a private app on Chris's phone where he stored pictures of himself and a woman named Nicole Kessinger, hoping that his wife would never discover them. Several text messages were also discovered from Shanan's phone, corroborating the story. On one hand, there was the wife, lamenting to her friends about the state of her marriage. While she and her 2 daughters were on that vacation to North Carolina we talked about earlier, Shanan confided in one of her friends, Christina Meacham, that her marriage was going through hard times. In the texts, she claimed that when Chris arrived in his home state, he would not hug or kiss her, and that he became distant and would not even talk to her. All of these happened just before the pregnancy announcement, and according to the friend, Shanan explained to her that she didn't know her husband anymore, and that she was scared about how he would react to the news of her pregnancy. It was also revealed that Chris had told his wife that they were no longer compatible, and this was also confirmed by a set of texts from Shanan to another friend. Shanan also revealed in another text that she couldn't handle the 3 kids alone if the marriage ever went south, with the friend encouraging her that everything would be all right. The texts also revealed that not only was the marriage breaking apart, but Chris's mom and sister were also working round the clock to ensure it happened. The court document also revealed the dating history of Chris and his mistress, Kessinger. According to these revelations, Chris had actually informed the lady that he and his wife were getting a divorce, and he described his wife as a hard-headed woman who doesn't listen to him. Chris also told his mistress that his wife bad-mouthed him so much in front of the children that they were even starting to repeat it. However, he never disclosed to Kessinger that Shanan was carrying his baby. Investigators also found evidence of Chris taking his mistress on a trip to the Great Sand Dune National Park in southern Colorado for the 4th of July holiday, as well as the purchase of an expensive necklace. According to Kessinger herself, they had only dated for a few weeks when Chris confessed his love for her. Although their relationship had been quite intimate before then, this was the first time Chris expressed his deepest feelings to Kessinger, and he accompanied the declaration with an elaborate story. Chris claimed he was looking for a 2-bedroom apartment to move into with Kessinger now that his marriage was crashing, and that he planned to list the couple's home on the market. On August 11, 2 days before the bloody incident, the 2 lovers met for the last time on a dinner date in the Denver area. Kessinger also revealed that she was shocked to learn that Watts was actually pregnant, and according to the documents, Chris initially denied the pregnancy, claiming that he wasn't the father, before eventually admitting that he was. Following the mysterious disappearance, Kessinger claimed that her first thought was that Shanan had simply taken the girls and left the broken marriage, and although she grew suspicious and began overthinking everything, she never imagined that he would take the lives of his entire family. The confession. Following the failed polygraph test, the investigators decided to bring in his father in an attempt to bring the truth out of him. It was then that he revealed to his father that both Shanan and the kids were dead. However, instead of admitting he was responsible for their murder, Chris claimed he caught his wife smothering the kids to death, and in a fit of rage, he snapped and took her life as well. Then he wrapped the remains of both 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, drove out to the oil field where he worked, and disposed of their bodies there. Now that the officers had confirmation that the 3 missing persons were already dead, the next task was recovering their bodies, and that was when the extent of Chris's cruelty began to unfold. Following Chris's direction, investigators were able to locate Shanan's body in a shallow grave, while Belle and Celeste were found in oil tanks. Due to the fact that the opening of the tanks measured only 8 in diameter, the kids had scratches on their bodies from being forced down the storage. The recovery of the bodies totally altered the course of the case, introducing new twists and turns no one really saw coming. But did people really believe Shanan was responsible for the kids' deaths? Not really. From investigators to families of the victims, all fingers pointed at the husband. But even with the overwhelming evidence, Chris held on to his version of the story. But that was all about to change. Monster on trial. On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, plus an additional 1 count per child cited as death of a child who had not yet attained 12 years of age, and the defendant was in a position of trust. This last charge was one of the facts that made the case even more haunting. Unlike what most people would expect, Chris was not the kind of father that was hated by his daughters. They loved him, and they saw him as a protective figure. But unfortunately, it was the very same hands that cradled them as babies that eventually snuffed life out of their little hearts. In addition to these charges, Chris was also slammed with 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy for the unborn baby, as well as 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. On the day of his arrest, the company he worked for decided to cut ties with him, and he was also denied bail at his first court hearing. His bail would later be set at $5 million, with him being required to put down at least 15% before being released. But just when you thought this case was all solved, it springs up another surprise. In a shocking twist, Chris decided not to fight the charges against him, and instead pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal to help him escape the death penalty. The victims' families also supported the deal, claiming that they didn't want any more deaths in the family. On November 19, 2018, Chris appeared in the courtroom to receive his sentence. It was an emotional moment for all involved, and with the media spreading the story like a wildfire, the whole of America set their gaze on the proceedings, waiting for the moment when justice would be handed down to the monster of Denver. He was subsequently handed 5 life sentences, with 3 running consecutively and 2 running concurrently, all without the possibility of parole. In addition, he also received a 48-year sentence for unlawful termination of Shanan's pregnancy, along with an extra 36 years for 3 charges of tampering with a deceased body. His sentence started immediately, but by December 3, he had to be transferred to an out-of-state location due to security reasons. On December 5, Chris Watts arrived at his new home in the Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison located in Waupun, Wisconsin, where he's currently paying for his horrific crimes. It was within the confines of this prison that Chris would eventually confess, revealing the truth of the events that transpired on that day. As we shine the spotlight on how the Denver monster, Chris Watts, lives his life sentence for murdering his family, some disturbing revelations also begin to emerge. For a person responsible for such a horrible crime, Chris seems to have gained some fans during his time in prison. These admirers, many of whom are women, write to him, expressing their love and affection for him. As disturbing as this may sound, some of them have even tried declaring his innocence, claiming that his wife was to be blamed for the incident. According to these allegations, Shanan was perceived as a domineering figure who made life a living hell for her husband, which eventually pushed him to the edge. And when he snapped, all hell broke loose, creating a horror story the whole world will not forget in a hurry. Do you believe the wife should share in the blame for the incident, or do you agree that the whole blame belongs to Chris alone? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section down below. Now, let's get back to the video. How the Denver monster, Chris Watts, lives his life sentence for murdering his family. Life behind bars is probably the closest Chris Watts has been to hell, and according to sources, he was treated as an outcast, even among criminals. In the criminal justice system, a special place is often reserved for people who harm children, not to mention a person who callously took the lives of his own children. But up until this point, Chris still had not admitted he was responsible for Bella and Celeste's murder. Everything changed on February 18, 2019, when he requested an interview with the police, claiming that he was ready to come clean about everything that happened that day. According to this new revelation, in the wee hours of August 13, 2018, Chris woke up Shanan, questioning her about the future of their relationship. Despite expecting a son, who they already named Nico Lee, Chris decided to tell her about his affair, informing her that their marriage would soon be a thing of the past. In response, Shanan told Chris he wouldn't be able to see the kids again if they ever divorced, and then out of anger, he strangled her to death. In the confession, Chris said he believed his wife began praying as he pounced on her, and that she didn't even try to fight him off. With adrenaline pumping through his chest, Chris began wrapping the body of his wife in a blanket. But in the process, little Bella walked in, inquiring about what was wrong with Mommy. Chris claims he didn't know exactly what he said to the kid, but he just continued with what he was doing and carried the body to the truck, as captured by the CCTV. After that, he brings both Bella and Celeste outside and puts them in the back seat of the truck, before driving 45 minutes to the oil field where he worked. Each of the kids had their own blankets with them, which would explain why they were missing during the welfare check, and innocent Celeste even brought a stuffed animal along for the trip. As the kids rode along with their deceased mother in the back seat, they dozed off, held hands, and even wrapped their arms around each other. If only they knew that was the last time they would spend together alive. On getting to the field, Chris proceeded to place a blanket on Celeste, who was sitting mere inches from her sister, and proceeded to smother her to death. Then he picked up her body and disposed of the remains. Then he turned to Bella to enact the same cruel act. But before he could carry on, Bella asked her dad in a soft voice, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" Chris isn't sure what he said in response, but in a swift motion, he took the second blanket and smothered the second daughter to death as well. According to Chris, Bella's final words to him were, "No daddy," and then she gave up the ghost. He would later claim that the memories of that final moment still haunt him till today, and he could still hear the solemn voice of his little girl quietly asking for mercy, but resigned to fate. These new revelations sent shockwaves through the entire community, and it further exemplified how cold-blooded Chris's actions were. After taking Bella's life, he also dumped her remains in an oil tank before burying his wife in a shallow grave nearby. But that's not where the story ends, because not long after this, Chris decided to introduce some new twists and turns to the plot. Revelations from the pen pal. Meet Cherlin Cattle, Chris Watts' 67-year-old pen pal, who began writing to him after seeing his first interview in 2019. The Midwest author claimed she was attracted to his boyish demeanor, and even though she knew he was guilty, something about the whole case drew her to him, and so the two began exchanging letters. Thanks to these letters, we now have another side of the story, one that differs slightly from Chris's initial statement. While other confessions made it seem as though Chris didn't plan the murders, the letters tell an entirely different tale. In an episode of the show Lifetime's Cellmate Secrets, Cadel revealed that the incident was actually premeditated and that Chris once mentioned daydreaming about taking his wife's life. Whenever they had a disagreement and Shanan was yelling at him, he would not fight back, but instead just stand there and daydream about what it would be like to end her life. This new revelation also altered the dynamics of the case, offering a glimpse into his mindset towards the day of the attack. Chris also later revealed that as he tucked his kids on the night before the attack, he knew that would be the last time since he already planned everything in his head. The brutal nature of the event, coupled with the age of the victims involved, made the situation even more disturbing. Today, Chris Watts' story remains a nightmarish tale that still evokes tears and depressing memories from the families of those involved. Several documentaries have been released, exploring the unexplored details about the Wyatt family murder, and in September 2020, Netflix released American Murder: The Family Next Door, an in-depth documentary which captured the story in its entirety. Thankfully, Chris will most likely remain behind bars for the rest of his life, an adequate punishment for a crime of that magnitude. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.